Violent demonstrations have erupted in Northern Ireland after a gruesome knife attack. Hundreds of anti-immigration protesters took to the streets of Belfast with vehicles set alight and a house on fire. Police have swarmed the city, deploying a convoy of armoured vehicles to try to contain the violence. The disorder was sparked after a 30-year-old man, who police say is a Sudanese refugee, was charged with attempted murder following a stabbing attack on a city street on Monday. Authorities say the victim of the attack is in a serious condition with injuries to his eyes, back and face. I spoke with BBC correspondent Dan Johnson, who is on the ground there just a little earlier.
Yeah, it's been a difficult evening on the streets of Belfast and in other parts of Northern Ireland too. There'd been a huge amount of concern through the day. The tension had been rising in the aftermath of this incident, this stabbing attack that was reported here last night. A huge amount of concern in the community. People preparing to come out on the streets and protest. The authorities have been urging people, pleading with people all day not to gather, not to protest and not to indulge in any violence. But what we've seen tonight is that people have gathered in places, in small numbers, in pockets. Here in the community that I'm on, just on the edge of Belfast city centre, we saw about 100 or 150 people who gathered at around 7 p.m. local time. Lots of them young people, lots of them masked with balaclavas, and they started pushing bins together into the middle of the road and setting fire to those. Now, the traffic had already been disrupted by the number of people blocking the road. There was one of the local buses here that was caught in that. The passengers and the driver were off the bus, but the bus actually caught fire when the bins were pushed towards it, and it was quite dramatic for a time because it was quite an intense fire and the tyres were exploding on the bus. So lots of people who live here were afraid of exactly what was happening. The fire service came in attendance to that incident but wasn't able to actually get close enough to fight the fire because of the crowd and the risks of things escalating. So lots of police on the streets, lots of firefighters too, but for a time they just stood back and let this play out. And this is not the only place where this has happened. After a couple of hours of that scene playing out, a lot of the crowd moved off away from where that bus was burning and went round the corner down some of the side streets here. And this is where they believed some migrants were living. Now, it's reported that the man involved in the incident last night, who's been charged with attempted murder, had come to Northern Ireland on a temporary visa, having left Sudan via Dublin. So lots of people in this crowd had decided that they were going to target foreigners in this community. We don't know exactly who was living in the buildings that they went to, but again, they started setting fire to bins, pushing those against the buildings, and that was at risk of setting fire to those buildings. And there were dramatic scenes here with firefighters and police officers having to rescue families from those homes, actually guiding families and kids out through the flames. It looks like some people had a very narrow escape here this evening, and the emergency services are still on scene, damping down and dealing with that. So everything that the authorities had worried about earlier through today has unfortunately played out in small pockets. There has been damage to property. There has been a risk to life in some places. And leading politicians, the police, are still urging people not to do this, not for this to escalate, because the fear is with that suspect who will be appearing in court here tomorrow, there may be a repeat of this.
Dan, what do we know of the incident that led to this violence?
Well, it's reported that a man in his 40s was stabbed on the streets of Belfast last night. It's not clear exactly how that started, who he was, what his relationship was to this attacker. The only thing we know about him is that he's in his 30s, that he came here from Sudan and that he was on a temporary visa, which is why there's been this tension about exactly what was behind this crime and what the threat may be. That suspect has been charged with attempted murder. He will appear in court tomorrow. But this echoes something that caused a lot of tension in the UK last week after the murder of Henry Novak, the attacker in his case, who was sentenced last week. And there were protests and disturbances in Southampton last week. So this has flowed on from that. And some of the people I've spoken to here on the streets of Northern Ireland this evening say it's that sort of concern about migrants coming to the UK and then committing crime, which has driven them to protest tonight and has led to some of the scenes that we have seen. It's worth saying this is only small pockets. It's not widespread disorder, but we have seen buildings targeted. We have seen vehicles burned. There are reports in other places of stones being thrown at the police, some bottles being thrown as well. And I have seen anti-Islamic graffiti on some of the shop fronts that has been sprayed here. So I think you get a clear sense of exactly what some of these protesters were about, what their message was. No doubt there were some people who were genuinely concerned by what they'd seen and wanted to get a message across, but there is also that anti-immigration element, which has been part of some of the protests we saw last week in Great Britain and is part of the disorder that we've seen on the streets of Northern Ireland this evening. There is damage. There is a lot of fear amongst the local community about what may be next to come. Things do appear to have calmed down for this evening. There's just been a very heavy rain shower, which has driven a lot of people away from the streets, and it's very late here now. But the concern will be that with further developments in this case, as that suspect appears in court tomorrow, and we learn more detail about exactly what happened, and potentially get updates on the condition of the man who was attacked. He's in hospital. We're told he's in a very serious condition. And the videos that are going around showing that attack, you get a very clear sense of just how brutal that incident was. So that's why there's been so much concern, why there's so much tension and so much fear that this could still escalate further, perhaps in the days to come.